What happens when a former president sits down for what's supposed to be a routine interview, only to have it spiral into one of the most explosive exchanges ever caught on camera? The tension in that studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what started as standard questions quickly turned into something nobody expected. Before we dive into this absolutely wild interview, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about all of this. Trust me, you're going to want to stay until the end because this gets absolutely insane. The interview began simply enough. Trump walked into the studio and sat down across from veteran NBC reporter Sarah Mitchell. The cameras were rolling, the lights were hot, and Sarah wasted no time getting into it. Mr. Trump, thank you for joining us today. I want to start with the economy. Your critics say that the current inflation issues stem directly from policies implemented during your administration. What's your response to that? Trump leaned back in his chair, shaking his head before she even finished. Sarah, that's fake news and you know it. You know it. The economy under my administration was the best this country has ever seen. Best unemployment numbers, best stock market, best everything. What we're seeing now, that's not my policies. That's the disaster of the current administration trying to undo everything we built. Sarah nodded, her pen poised over her notepad. But economists have pointed to the spending increases and the trade policies as contributing factors. Which economists? Trump interrupted. The same ones who said my policies would never work? The same ones who predicted economic collapse when I was elected? Those economists? Because I remember the economy booming. Sarah, I remember record numbers. I'm referring to analysis from the Federal Reserve and multiple independent economic institutions. Trump waved his hand dismissively. The Federal Reserve, oh please. Let me tell you something about the Federal Reserve. They fought me every step of the way. Every single step. I wanted lower interest rates to help the American people, and they fought me. Now look what's happening. They're scrambling, changing policies left and right because they realize they were wrong. Sarah pressed forward, her tone remaining measured. Let's move to foreign policy. Your meeting with North Korea's leader was controversial. Critics argue it legitimized a dictator without achieving concrete denuclearization. Critics, 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 Trump said, his voice rising slightly. That's all you people focus on. Did those critics get North Korea to stop testing missiles? No. Did those critics establish a dialogue that had been dead for decades? No. I did that. Me. I was the one sitting across from him, making deals, opening conversations. And it worked, Sarah. It worked until the current administration threw it all away. But there were no binding agreements, no verification processes. Trump leaned forward now, pointing at her. You want to talk about verification? Let's talk about verification. When I was president, Kim Jong-un wasn't firing missiles over Japan. He wasn't threatening Seoul. We had peace, real peace, not the fake peace the media pretends to care about when it suits their narrative. Sarah glanced at her notes. Your supporters believe you were treated unfairly by the media throughout your presidency. Do you believe the press was biased against you? Biased? Trump laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sarah, that's the understatement of the century. The media, and I'm not just talking about NBC but especially networks like yours, they had it out for me from day one. From the moment I came down that escalator, it was attack after attack. Russia hoax, impeachment hoaxes, all of it. The American people saw through it. That's why they elected me, but the media never stopped. The Russia investigation resulted in multiple indictments and convictions. Trump's jaw tightened. Of people who had nothing to do with collusion. Process crimes, Sarah, you know this. The whole thing was a witch hunt designed to undermine a duly elected president. And it failed because there was nothing there. Nothing. But the media. They ran with it for years. Destroyed people's lives. Destroyed careers, and for what? What did they find? Nothing. Sarah shifted in her seat. Let's discuss the events of January 6th. You've maintained you had no responsibility for what happened that day. However, many of your supporters who attended that rally and later stormed the Capitol said they believed they were following your wishes. The air in the room seemed to change instantly. Trump sat up straighter, his expression hardening. Here we go. I knew we'd get here. This is what you people do. You twist words. You create narratives. You blame me for everything. I'm simply asking about your role in the events of that day. My role. My role was giving a speech about election integrity, which is my right, Sarah. It's my First Amendment right. I told people to march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol. Those were my exact words. Peacefully and patriotically. But you won't show that clip, will you? Your network won't play that part, because it doesn't fit the story you want to tell. Sarah maintained eye contact. But you also told them to fight like hell, or they wouldn't have a country anymore. Fight like hell is a common expression, and you know it. Democrats use it all the time. Obama used it, Clinton used it, Biden used it. But when I say it, suddenly it's incitement? That's a double standard. And that's exactly what I'm talking about when I say the media treats me differently. Several people died that day, Mr. Trump. Over 100 police officers were injured. The Capitol was breached for the first time since the War of 1812. Trump's voice grew louder, and I condemned the violence immediately. Immediately, Sarah, I told people to go home. I told them to be peaceful. What more could I have done? Some say you could have done it sooner, that the delay in your response allowed the situation to escalate. Some say, Trump repeated mockingly. Who are these people? Anonymous sources? The same sources who lied about everything else? I responded appropriately, and frankly the real question should be, why wasn't there better security? I offered National Guard troops beforehand, and Nancy Pelosi turned them down. Where's your investigation into that? Sarah flipped to another page in her notebook. There are documented records showing that offer was never formally made to Speaker Pelosi. The Pentagon has no record of such authorization. Trump shook his head vigorously. Wrong. Completely wrong. The Pentagon. These are the same people who leaked classified information throughout my entire presidency. The same people who worked against me at every turn. You're going to trust their records? I made the offer, Sarah. It was rejected, and now they're trying to cover it up because it destroys their entire narrative. Let's move to the classified documents case. You were found to have retained highly sensitive national security materials at your residence. How do you justify that? Justify? I don't need to justify anything. Those were my documents. I declassified them. As president, I had absolute authority to declassify anything I wanted, and I did. The Presidential Records Act is very clear about this, but again, the Justice Department weaponized the system against me. Sarah leaned forward slightly. But there's no evidence of a declassification order. No paperwork, no witnesses to the declassification. I don't need paperwork, Trump shot back. The president's authority to declassify is inherent. It's automatic. If I, as president, decide something is declassified, it's declassified. That's how it works, Sarah, whether you or the corrupt Justice Department likes it or not. Other former presidents have returned materials when asked, "Why didn't you?" Trump's face flushed. I was cooperating. I was working with them, and then they raided my home like I'm some kind of criminal. They sent dozens of agents, armed agents, to my home where my family lives. They went through my wife's closet, Sarah. They went through everything. That's not how you treat a former president. That's how you treat a political enemy, and that's exactly what this was. A political hit job. The Justice Department says you refuse to comply with a subpoena. The Justice Department is being run by people who hate me. The whole thing is corrupt from top to bottom. Look at who they appointed. Look at their backgrounds. Look at their social media posts before they took these positions. These are partisan hacks, Sarah, and everyone knows it except apparently the mainstream media. Sarah took a breath and changed direction. Your business dealings have come under scrutiny. There are allegations of financial improprieties, inflated asset valuations for loans while deflating them for taxes. Trump stood up slightly, then sat back down, his hands gesturing emphatically. My businesses are beautiful, successful businesses. I built an empire, a real empire, while these prosecutors were sitting in classrooms learning how to twist the law. Asset valuation is subjective, Sarah. Any real estate developer will tell you that. Properties are worth what someone will pay for them, and banks do their own due diligence. Nobody was defrauded. Everyone made money. But they want to criminalize normal business practices because they can't beat me politically. A jury found your company guilty of tax fraud. A Manhattan jury, Trump emphasized, in the most liberal city in America. I couldn't get a fair trial there. My lawyers told me that from the beginning. The jury pool was poisoned by years of negative media coverage from outlets like yours. It was a show trial, plain and simple. Are you suggesting the entire legal system is rigged against you? I'm not suggesting it. I'm telling you it is. Look at the facts, Sarah. Look at the timing of all these cases. They all started ramping up right when I announced I was running again. That's not a coincidence. That's coordination. That's the weaponization of law enforcement against a political opponent. Something you'd expect in a third world country. Not the United States of America. Sarah's voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it now. Multiple jurisdictions, different prosecutors, different judges, different juries, all finding problems with your conduct. At what point do you consider that maybe there's merit to these cases? Trump pointed at her, his voice rising. Never, because I know the truth. I was there, I lived it. I built those businesses, I ran that administration. These cases are garbage, they're political persecution, and the American people see it. That's why my support keeps going up every time they indict me. Every single time, Sarah, because people aren't stupid. Your critics say you're playing the victim. My critics, Trump said with a bitter laugh. My critics have been wrong about everything. They said I couldn't win in 2016, I won. They said the economy would crash, it soared. They said I'd start wars, I brought peace. They said the investigations would destroy me. I'm stronger than ever. So excuse me if I don't care what my critics think. Sarah consulted her notes again. You've made statements about election fraud that have been repeatedly debunked. 60-plus court cases found no evidence of widespread fraud. Your own Attorney General said there was no fraud that would change the outcome. Why do you continue to make these claims? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Trump's expression hardened into something almost unreadable. Debunked by who? The same media that's been lying about me for years? Those court cases, most of them weren't even heard on the merits. Sarah. They were dismissed on procedural grounds, standing, timing, all these technical excuses to avoid looking at the evidence. What evidence? Multiple recounts, audits, investigations by Republican officials found nothing. There's massive evidence, thousands of affidavits, sworn testimony, statistical impossibilities, dead people voting multiple times, ballot harvesting, machines changing votes. It's all documented, but nobody wants to look at it because it's easier to just call me a liar. Sarah's tone sharpened. The cybersecurity officials you appointed called it the most secure election in history. And I fired them because they were wrong or lying. Probably both. Look, I'm not saying I know exactly what happened everywhere, but I know what I saw. I know the numbers. I was winning big in all these states, and then suddenly in the middle of the night, massive ballot dumps, all for my opponent. That doesn't happen naturally, Sarah. Vote counting takes time, especially with mail-in ballots which tend to favor Democrats. This was explained extensively. Trump waved his hand dismissively. Mail-in ballots, another disaster. That whole system is ripe for fraud. You mail out millions of ballots to who knows where. No verification, no chain of custody. And we're supposed to just trust that it's all legitimate? Come on. Secretaries of State, both Republican and Democrat, vouched for the integrity of their systems. Secretaries of State, governors, they were all part of it. They certified results they knew were questionable because they were afraid of the media, afraid of being called conspiracy theorists, afraid of losing their positions. Political cowardice, that's what it was. Sarah set her pen down, looking directly at Trump. So your position is that essentially everyone, Republicans and Democrats, judges you appointed, your own staff members, election officials across the country, all of them are either corrupt or cowards? When it comes to this issue, yes. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting the system failed. It would mean admitting that our elections aren't secure. Nobody wants to do that, so they all circle the wagons and attack anyone who asks questions. But I'm not afraid to ask questions, Sarah. I'm not afraid to demand answers. Even when those answers have been provided repeatedly by credible sources? Trump laughed harshly. Credible sources like the FBI that spied on my campaign? Credible sources like the intelligence agencies that pushed the Russia hoax? You keep using that word credible, but I don't think you understand what it means anymore. Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. Let's talk about your rhetoric. You've called your opponents vermin. You've suggested terminating parts of the Constitution. You've promised retribution if elected again. Don't you think that kind of language is dangerous? Dangerous? I'll tell you what's dangerous, Sarah. What's dangerous is a two-tiered justice system. What's dangerous is censorship of conservative voices. What's dangerous is open borders letting in millions of illegal immigrants. What's dangerous is a media that lies to the American people every single day. That's dangerous, not my rhetoric. But your words have consequences. We've seen increased threats against election workers, against judges, against prosecutors involved in your cases. Trump leaned back, spreading his hands. I can't control what other people do. I never told anyone to threaten anybody. In fact, I've condemned violence many times, but you never show that part, do you? You just blame me for everything and expect me to apologize for speaking the truth. Is it speaking truth or is it inciting your base to action? My base doesn't need inciting, Sarah. They're angry because they see what's happening to this country. They see the crime, the inflation, the chaos at the border, and they're fed up. I'm just giving voice to what millions of Americans are thinking. Sarah pressed on. You've shared content on social media calling for military tribunals for your political opponents. How is that appropriate? I share a lot of things. Sometimes I'm highlighting what other people are saying. I don't necessarily endorse everything, but I think it's important to show different perspectives, especially perspectives the mainstream media ignores. But you have a platform with millions of followers. Don't you have a responsibility to be careful about what you amplify? Trump's voice rose. Responsibility? Let's talk about responsibility. What about the responsibility of the media to tell the truth? What about the responsibility of tech companies not to censor political speech they disagree with? What about the responsibility of politicians to follow the law? Why is it always my responsibility, Sarah? Why am I always held to a different standard? Because you're a former president seeking the office again. The standard is different. The standard is impossible is what it is. No matter what I say, no matter what I do, it's never good enough for people like you. I could cure cancer tomorrow and you'd find a way to attack me for it. Sarah took a deep breath. Your former vice president has said he won't endorse you. Multiple members of your cabinet have spoken out against you. Your former chief of staff called you a threat to democracy. These are people who worked closely with you, who saw you in action. Why should voters ignore their assessments? Trump's face reddened. Mike Pence is a stiff who I made. I picked him, I elevated him, and when the moment came to do the right thing, he folded like a cheap suit. My former cabinet members, some of them were great, some of them were disasters who I should have fired sooner. The ones speaking out, they're bitter because I fired them, or because they want to sell books. It's that simple. General Kelly called you unfit for office. Kelly was in over his head. He came from the military where people follow orders, and he couldn't handle a White House where people actually think for themselves and debate issues. He was a disaster, Sarah, an absolute disaster. General Mattis said you tried to undermine the Constitution. Mattis, another one who's mad I fired him. These generals, they sound impressive because of their titles, but let me tell you, they were wrong about everything. Wrong about Afghanistan, wrong about Syria, wrong about our strategy. I actually got things done while they sat around talking about process and bureaucracy. Sarah leaned forward. But these aren't just political opponents. These are respected figures who served in your administration, warning about your fitness for office. Respected by who? The Washington establishment? The same establishment that's been running this country into the ground for decades? I don't care if they respect me, Sarah. I care about results, and I got results. That's what the American people care about, not what some disgruntled former employees say to get on television. Do you have any capacity for self-reflection? Any consideration that maybe some of this criticism is valid? Trump stood up from his chair, then sat back down quickly, his hands cutting through the air. Self-reflection? I reflect all the time. I think about what I accomplished, what we built, and what's been destroyed since I left office. That's reflection, Sarah. But if you're asking if I'm going to sit here and agree with you that I'm somehow the problem, that's never going to happen because it's not true. You've never apologized for anything. Not for the Access Hollywood tape, not for January 6th, not for the classified documents, nothing. Do you believe you've never done anything wrong? I've made mistakes like everyone else, but the things you're talking about aren't mistakes. The Access Hollywood tape was locker room talk from years ago. I apologized at the time, but you keep bringing it up like it happened yesterday. January 6th, I did nothing wrong. The documents, I did nothing wrong. You want me to apologize for things that aren't my fault, and that's not going to happen. Sarah's voice grew firmer. Some would say that inability to acknowledge error is a character flaw that makes you unsuitable for the presidency. Trump pointed at her again, his voice sharp. And some would say that a media that can't report fairly is a bigger threat to this country than anything I've ever done. You sit there in judgment like you're perfect, like NBC has never gotten anything wrong, never pushed a false narrative, never had to retract or correct stories. Give me a break, Sarah. We're not talking about NBC, we're talking about you. No, we're talking about a double standard. That's what this whole interview is about. You ask me these gotcha questions, you frame everything in the worst possible light, and then you act surprised when I push back. This is exactly why millions of Americans don't trust the media anymore. Sarah glanced at her producer off camera, then back at Trump. Let's talk about your plans if elected. You've said you want to purge the federal bureaucracy, fire civil servants, and install loyalists. Isn't that authoritarian? Authoritarian? No, that's called doing my job. The bureaucracy is full of people who think they run the government, who think they're above elected officials. The deep state is real, Sarah, and it worked against me every day I was in office. If I'm elected again, I'm going to clean house. I'm going to put people in positions who actually want to implement the agenda the American people voted for. But those civil servants provide continuity and expertise. They provide obstruction and resistance. I had people in my own administration leaking to the press, undermining policies, slow-walking everything. That's not how government should work. When the people elect a president, that president should be able to implement his vision, not have it sabotaged by unelected bureaucrats. Sarah pressed forward, her voice steady despite the rising tension. You've talked about using the Justice Department to investigate your political enemies. You've specifically named individuals you want prosecuted. How is that not abusing power? Trump slammed his hand on the armrest. Abusing power? They've been abusing power against me for years. They've investigated me, indicted me, raided my home, and you're asking me about abuse of power? These people committed real crimes. They spied on my campaign, they lied to courts, and nobody's been held accountable. If I'm president again, there will be accountability. That's not abuse, that's justice. But that's exactly what concerns constitutional scholars. Using the Justice Department for political retribution. It's not retribution when they actually broke the law. You keep framing it as political, but these are real crimes that were ignored because the people committing them were on the right team. I'm going to make sure the law applies equally to everyone, not just to me and my supporters. Sarah shifted gears. You've praised authoritarian leaders. Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un. What does that say about your view of democracy? Trump shook his head vigorously. Out of context quotes again. I said these leaders were smart, that they were strong for their countries. I can work with these people because they respect strength, and they respected me. Putin invaded Ukraine shortly after you left office. Putin didn't invade while I was president because he knew I wouldn't allow it. The current administration projected weakness from day one. Putin saw an opportunity and took it. That's on them, not me. You've suggested you could end the war in 24 hours. How? By negotiating from strength. I could sit down with Putin, sit down with Zelensky and hammer out a deal. It requires someone who knows how to make deals. Sarah leaned back slightly. Critics say that would mean forcing Ukraine to give up territory. Critics don't have to live with a war dragging on for years. The people of Ukraine want peace. Sometimes peace requires compromise. What's the alternative? Keep sending billions while people keep dying? Trump's voice rose sharply. I'd end a war that's threatening to drag us into World War III. That's leadership, making tough decisions that weak politicians don't have the guts to make. Sarah shifted topics. Your tax return showed you paid minimal federal income taxes in several years. How do you justify that to working-class Americans? I paid millions in taxes. The years I paid less, I had losses, I had deductions. I followed the tax code that politicians wrote. If there's a problem with the tax system, blame Congress, not me. And by the way, I took no salary as president. Zero. But the optics of a billionaire paying less than a teacher. Trump pointed at her, his face flushed. What about the optics of Hunter Biden selling influence? What about politicians becoming millionaires on government salaries? You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about real corruption. Sarah's tone sharpened. We're interviewing you, not Hunter Biden. Can you stay focused on questions about your conduct? That's exactly the problem. You only want to talk about me. You only want to investigate me. Anyone else gets a pass. That's not journalism, that's a hit job, and everyone watching knows it. I'm asking you questions any presidential candidate should be able to answer. You're asking me loaded questions designed to make me look bad no matter how I answer. Sarah took a breath. You've made statements suggesting you'd only be a dictator on day one. Even as a joke, doesn't that concern you? Trump laughed, but there was an edge to it. It was obviously a joke. I was making fun of the left, calling me a dictator. It was sarcasm, Sarah. But given your statements about ignoring constitutional constraints, I never said I'd ignore the Constitution, Trump interrupted loudly. Never. Stop twisting my words. You posted that fraud allows for termination of rules and regulations, even those in the Constitution. Trump waved his hand. That was about how they changed election rules unconstitutionally. I was pointing out their hypocrisy. But of course your network ran with it, made it sound like I'm planning a coup. Fake news at its finest. Sarah's voice remained firm. Your campaign has talked about Schedule F, reclassifying federal workers. Combined with your talk of retribution, doesn't that paint a picture of authoritarian governance? Trump leaned forward intensely. It paints a picture of a president who will actually drain the swamp. The federal government is bloated with people who actively work against conservative policies. The people elected me to shake things up, and that's what I'm going to do. Even if it means dismantling checks and balances? There are no checks and balances when unelected bureaucrats have more power than the president. The president is the chief executive, and everyone in the executive branch should answer to him, period. Sarah pressed on. Final question. After everything, the investigations, the indictments, the criticism from former allies, do you have any regrets about how you've conducted yourself? Trump stared at her for a long moment. Regrets? My only regret is that I trusted people who betrayed me. My only regret is that I didn't fight harder against the corruption in Washington. But regrets about standing up for the American people? About fighting for this country? Zero regrets, Sarah. Zero. Not even January 6th? Especially not January 6th. I gave a speech about election integrity, and I told people to be peaceful. What happened after that? The violence, I condemned it. But I'm not going to apologize for fighting for what I believe in. Sarah closed her notebook. Some would say that attitude, that refusal to accept any responsibility, is precisely why you're unfit for office. Trump stood up abruptly. And some would say that a media that refuses to report honestly is precisely why this country needs someone like me. We're done here. He pulled off his microphone and walked toward the studio door. Sarah called after him. Mr. Trump, we still have 10 minutes scheduled. Trump turned back, his voice cutting. I think we're past schedules, don't you? You got your interview. You got your sound bites. Enjoy the ratings, Sarah. He pushed through the door, leaving it swinging behind him. Sarah sat at the desk, staring at her notes as the cameras continued rolling. The crew stood frozen. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of equipment. So there you have it, one of the most explosive interviews ever recorded. The tension, the accusations, the complete breakdown into something raw and unfiltered. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. What do you think about how this interview went down? Do you think the questions were fair, or was it a setup? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.